elderly couple bought a storage unit. Inside was a one-of-a-kind prototype car from the 1950s. The sheet came off in one motion, and beneath it sat something that had no right to exist. A car with lines so perfect they seemed drawn by wind itself. Chrome capturing the single bare bulb like captured moonlight, and a badge on the hood that read Starling 001 in elegant script nobody had seen on any automobile ever made. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, tell us where you're watching from. And to make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or life-changing discoveries, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Margaret Holloway stood frozen, one hand still gripping the dusty canvas, the other pressed against her chest where her heart hammered like it hadn't in decades. Beside her, Thomas, Tom to everyone except creditors and doctors, had gone pale, his weathered hand reaching out to touch the fender, then pulling back as if the metal might burn him. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, and Margaret didn't correct his language like she normally would. Some moments demanded stronger words than prayer. The storage unit stretched 15 feet deep and 12 wide, Unit 247 at the Riverside Storage Complex, which they'd won at auction 3 hours ago for $475. Their last $475, if she was being honest, which she tried not to be too often these days. The auctioneer had rattled through the details so fast. Belongings of Eugene Castellano, deceased, no next of kin, sold as is, that neither she nor Tom had processed much beyond the words vintage vehicle visible under tarp. They'd imagined a 1960s Mustang maybe, something they could flip for a few thousand, enough to catch up on the mortgage payment they were 2 months behind on, enough to stop the tight feeling in Margaret's chest every time the phone rang. This wasn't a Mustang. This wasn't anything that had ever rolled off a Detroit assembly line. Tom found his voice first. He was 73, walked with a cane since the knee replacement, had worked 46 years as a precision machinist before the factory closed. His eye for metalwork was better than most engineers half his age. "Maggie," he said slowly, using the name only he could get away with, "this is hand-built. Look at those seams. Look at the way the chassis sits." Margaret stepped closer, squinting in the dim light. The car was smaller than modern vehicles, sleeker, with a fastback design that seemed decades ahead of its supposed 1950s origin. The paint was a deep midnight blue, or maybe black, hard to tell under the dust. But where Tom's fingers had brushed the fender, it gleamed like polished sapphire. "What's a Starling?" she asked. "Never heard of it." Tom was moving around the vehicle now, his cane forgotten against the wall, 73-year-old knees somehow steady as he ducked to examine the undercarriage. "Christ, Maggie, this has independent rear suspension, disc brakes. They barely had that technology in racing cars back then." The storage unit smelled of decades-old oil, dust, the particular mustiness of things left too long in the dark. Boxes lined the walls, most marked with faded labels in neat handwriting. "Castellano Engineering," read one. "Project Phoenix, Drafts," said another. A benchwork stood in the corner, tools hung in precise rows, everything organized with the care of someone who believed they'd return someday. Margaret picked up a clipboard hanging from a nail. The top sheet was yellowed but legible, dated August 14, 1954. A parts list, technical specifications, numbers and terms she didn't understand. But at the bottom, in the same neat hand, "Second mortgage approved. We proceed. God help us all." "Tom," she said quietly, "I think someone bet everything on this car." Her husband emerged from beneath the vehicle, dust in his white hair, but his eyes were bright in a way she hadn't seen since before his retirement, before the factory closure, before the slow, grinding disappointment of their shrinking bank account and growing stack of bills. "Someone should have," he said. "This is extraordinary work. This is—" He stopped, hand on the hood, fingers tracing the badge. "Maggie, what if this was supposed to be something? What if this was supposed to change everything?" The door of the storage unit stood open behind them, October sunlight slanting across the asphalt where other auction winners were hauling furniture and boxes to their trucks. Normal people with normal finds. Margaret and Tom had spent 67 years being normal, high school sweethearts, married at 20, 3 kids raised in a 2-bedroom house on Jefferson Street, a lifetime of modest dreams and careful budgets. Now they stood in front of a car that shouldn't exist, in a dead man's storage unit with their last few $100s spent and no clear path forward. "We should call someone," Margaret said, though she didn't specify who. A museum? A car collector? The police? Did you call the police when you found something too beautiful to understand? Tom was opening the driver's side door. It swung out with a smooth, well-oiled motion that spoke of careful preservation. The interior was cream leather, barely cracked, with a dashboard that looked more like an aircraft cockpit than a 1950s automobile. The steering wheel was wrapped in wood and metal, the gauges circular and elegant, each one labeled in that same neat hand. In the center of the dashboard, mounted behind glass, was a small brass plaque. "For Catherine. I promised I would build you something no one had ever seen. I kept that promise, even if you never saw it. Eugene." Margaret felt her throat tighten. 67 years of marriage had taught her what love looked like in its truest form. Not the easy moments, but the ones where you kept promises even after they'd stopped mattering to anyone but yourself. "Check the glove box," Tom said softly. Inside were 3 things. A black and white photograph of a young couple, the woman laughing in a summer dress, the man in shirt sleeves with his arm around her. A folded newspaper clipping from 1953, headline reading, "Local Engineer's Revolutionary Design Rejected by Big 3 Automakers," and a small leather journal, its pages filled with neat handwriting. Margaret opened the journal carefully. The first entry was dated June 3, 1953. "They don't see it. I spent 3 months presenting to Ford, GM, and Chrysler. I showed them the specifications, the fuel efficiency numbers, the safety innovations. They smiled and said it was interesting and ahead of its time. What they meant was it threatened everything they'd already invested in. They'd rather sell the same car with different chrome than risk something genuinely new. Catherine says I should let it go. We could use the money I'm spending on this obsession. But she doesn't understand. It's not about proving them wrong anymore. It's about building something that matters, something that shows what could be possible if we weren't all so afraid." Tom read over her shoulder, one hand resting on her shoulder the way he'd done 10,000 times before, in moments of joy and grief and every shade between. "Keep reading," he murmured. The entries continued, documenting Eugene Castellanos' lie at war against impossibility. He'd mortgaged his house, sold his wife's engagement ring with her tearful permission, worked 18-hour days in a rented garage, machining parts by hand, teaching himself metallurgy and aerodynamics from library books. The journal pages showed his evolution from frustrated engineer to something like a man possessed. July 12, 1954. Catherine is sick. "The doctors say there's nothing to be done. She made me promise I'd finish the car. She said she wants to know that something beautiful came from all this struggle. I promised her. I always keep my promises to Catherine." August 30, 1954. She died this morning. 62 days we had after the diagnosis. I held her hand and told her about the car, every detail, until she smiled and closed her eyes. The funeral is Saturday. On Monday, I go back to work. The next 50 pages documented the completion of the Starling prototype with mechanical precision, as if emotion had been sealed away in a separate chamber. Technical drawings, calculation after calculation, problem-solving that read like poetry to anyone who understood engineering. The final entry was dated November 18, 1954. It's finished. I drove it today. The only drive it may ever have. It handles like a dream. 43 miles per gallon on the highway. 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds. Smoother than anything Detroit will make for another 20 years. Catherine would have loved it. I sent letters to every automotive journalist I could find. I parked it outside the Ford headquarters in Dearborn for 6 hours until security made me leave. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to see what they weren't ready to understand. I don't know what to do with it now. I can't bring myself to dismantle it, but I can't afford to keep it either. So I'll store it. Maybe someday someone will find it and understand what we tried to do. Maybe they'll finish what I started. Catherine, I kept my promise. I wish you could see it. The journal ended there. No more entries. Just blank pages stretching toward an ending that came decades later, in whatever circumstances led Eugene Castellano's belongings to auction block 247. Margaret closed the book carefully, aware she was crying, though she couldn't remember starting. Tom's hand tightened on her shoulder. Neither spoke for a long moment. The storage unit's fluorescent light flickered. Outside, someone's truck engine started, driving away with a load of someone else's abandoned past. The ordinary sounds of ordinary people doing ordinary things. Tom broke the silence. What do we do? It was the question they'd been asking each other a lot lately. What do we do about the mortgage? What do we do about my prescriptions? What do we do about the fact that retirement was supposed to be golden years and instead felt like treading water in the dark? Margaret looked at the car, the Starling, Eugene's promise, Catherine's dream. She thought about the last $475, about the mortgage payment due in 3 weeks, about all the sensible options. They could photograph it, call auction houses, sell it to whatever wealthy collector offered the most. It would solve their immediate problems. It was the smart thing to do. I think, she said slowly, we should find out if it runs. Tom stared at her. In 67 years, Margaret had been the practical one, the voice of reason, the careful planner. She'd been the one who'd talked him out of risky investments and expensive hobbies and anything that smacked of foolishness. Maggie, we can't. Why not? She turned to face him. Tom, that man spent everything he had building something impossible. His wife died believing it mattered. And then he stored it in a concrete box for 60 years, waiting for someone to care. We found it. Maybe that means something. We need the money. We always need money. We've needed money for 5 years now, and we'll probably need it for 5 more. But this... She gestured at the car, at the journal, at the photograph of Eugene and Catherine young and laughing, in a world that didn't yet know how to break their hearts. This is someone's entire life sitting here. Don't we owe it to them to at least see what they built? Tom's expression shifted through several emotions Margaret couldn't quite name. Then, slowly, he smiled. The real smile. The one that had first made her fall in love with him at a high school dance in 1956, when the world was young and everything felt possible. You want to steal a dead man's car, he said. We bought it legally for $475. That makes it our car now. You want to steal a dead man's dream. I want to see if it's as good as he thought it was. Margaret surprised herself with the fierceness in her voice. I want to know if he was right and everyone else was wrong. I want... She stopped, swallowed. I want to believe that something we do matters, Tom. Just once. before we're too old and too tired and too practical to try." The silence stretched. Then Tom nodded once, decision made in the wordless way of people who'd been married long enough to share thoughts like air. "Okay," he said. "Let's see if it starts." The Starling had been sitting for decades, but Eugene Castellano had been a man who understood preservation. Tom discovered this as he carefully inspected the engine, a work of art in itself. Every component precisely placed, the engineering elegant in its efficiency. "He drained the fluids," Tom murmured, more to himself than Margaret. "Sealed the cylinders. This man knew what he was doing." They'd spent the last hour going through the storage unit more carefully, finding boxes of maintenance records, spare parts, labeled and organized, even a typed manual titled Starling Prototype 001, Operation and Care. Eugene had documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who believed future hands would need guidance. Margaret stood watch at the storage unit entrance, keeping an eye on the parking lot. Most auction winners had cleared out by now, but the facility manager is still circulating, checking units, making sure people weren't damaging property. She'd waved at him 20 minutes ago, tried to look casual, like she and Tom were just sorting through ordinary junk. Behind her, Tom worked with quiet intensity. Head centered to the auto parts store with a list: fresh oil, new battery, fuel pump rebuild kit, spark plugs. She used their credit card, the one they'd been trying not to touch, adding another $143 to their growing debt. Neither mentioned it. Now he was on his back beneath the car, 73 years old, knees that needed replacement, but moving with the focused energy of a man 30 years younger. This was what he'd lost when the factory closed, Margaret realized. Not just the income, but the purpose, the sense that his skills mattered, that his hands could still build and fix and create. "Tom," she called softly, "how's it looking?" A grunt, then the wheeled creeper slid out from under the Starling. Tom's face was smudged with old grease, but his eyes were bright. "Maggie, this engine is remarkable. Do you know what this is? This is a prototype fuel injection system. They didn't start using this in regular cars until the 1980s. Eugene built this in his garage with hand tools. Does it work? Give me another hour." He slid back under. Margaret walked to the workbench, examining the tools hung in neat rows. Each had a label underneath in Eugene's careful handwriting: 7/16 wrench, needle nose pliers, ball peen hammer. The organization of a mind that saw order in chaos, that believed if you just arranged things correctly, understood the right principles, you could build anything. She found another box, this one marked Personal, C. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with string. She hesitated, then carefully untied one bundle. The letters were from Catherine to Eugene, dated 1952 to 1954. Margaret opened one at random. "Dearest Eugene, I know you're discouraged after the Ford meeting. I saw it in your eyes when you came home, even though you tried to hide it. But I need you to understand something. Their rejection doesn't make your work less valuable. It just makes them blind. You see the world as it could be. They see the world as it profits them to keep it. Those are different visions, and yours is better. Don't let their small thinking make your dreams smaller. I believe in you. I believe in the car. I believe that someday someone will understand what you're trying to build, even if that someone isn't born yet. All my love, Catherine." Margaret read letter after letter, watching a marriage unfold in ink and paper. Catherine's unwavering support, even as money grew tight. Her gentle encouragement when Eugene wanted to quit. Her practical suggestions. What if you tried approaching it from the suspension angle first? That showed she understood the work, not just the man. The final letter was dated 2 weeks before Catherine's death. "My darling Eugene, the doctors say I have maybe 2 months. I'm not afraid of dying, but I am afraid of leaving you alone. I know how you think. You'll blame yourself, blame the car, blame all the money we spent. But I need you to hear this. I don't regret a single dollar. I don't regret a single hour you spent in that garage. You gave me something most people never get, the chance to be part of something larger than ourselves. Yes, I would have liked a bigger house or fancier clothes, but I got to watch you build the impossible. I got to see brilliance at work every single day. That's worth more than comfort. Promise me you'll finish it. Promise me you won't let bitterness make you small. You're not building a car, Eugene. You're building proof that ordinary people can create extraordinary things if they're brave enough to try. When it's done, drive it once for me. Drive it fast and far and feel everything we worked for come alive under your hands. Then you'll know it was all worth it. Forever yours, Catherine. Margaret? Tom's voice made her look up. He was standing now, holding a jerry can of fresh gasoline. Are you crying? She wiped her eyes quickly. Read this. She handed him Catherine's final letter, watched his face as he read, saw his jaw tighten, his eyes redden. When he finished, he set it down carefully, like it was something sacred. Jesus, he whispered. That kind of love. That's what this car is, Margaret said. It's not just engineering. It's a marriage. It's proof that she believed in him until her last breath. Tom looked at the Starling, then back at the letter. Maggie, if we sell this, we're not selling it. We can't afford. Tom. She stood, moved to him, put her hands on his grease-stained shirt. When was the last time you believed in something? Really believed, the way Eugene believed in this car? The way Catherine believed in Eugene? He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the afternoon sun was starting to slant orange. They'd been here for 6 hours now, longer than they'd planned, longer than was probably wise. I believe in you, he said finally. I've always believed in you. Then believe in this too. Believe we found it for a reason. Believe that maybe we can honor what they built by refusing to treat it like just another thing to buy and sell. The mortgage. We'll figure out the mortgage. We figured out harder things. But Tom, we're 73 and 71 years old. How many more chances do we get to do something that matters? How many more times do we get to choose wonder over practicality? He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he smiled slowly. When did you become the reckless one? About 6 hours ago, when I saw that badge. Tom laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. Okay, he said. Okay, let's see if we can wake up Eugene's dream. Another 2 hours of careful work took. Tom moved with meticulous precision, checking every system, replacing corroded hoses, cleaning fuel lines. Margaret assisted where she could, holding lights, passing tools, learning the car's anatomy as Tom explained each component. This is incredible work, he kept murmuring. Look at this valve timing. Look at how he routed the exhaust. Maggie, this man was 40 years ahead of everyone. The storage unit's overhead light had come on automatically as evening fell. Outside, the facility was empty now, just their car in the lot, their 2003 Toyota with 200,000 miles and a temperamental transmission. Tom stood, stretching his back. Moment of truth, he said. Margaret positioned herself by the storage unit door, ready to close it quickly if the manager appeared. Tom slid into the driver's seat, his hands resting on that beautiful wood-wrapped steering wheel. The key was in the glove box, he said, holding up a simple brass key attached to a tag that read Starling 001. He inserted it into the ignition, paused, looked at Margaret. If this doesn't work, then we tried. That's already more than most people do. Tom turned the key. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The silence felt enormous, filled with every hope and fear they'd carried into this strange day. Then the engine turned over. It coughed once, twice, then caught with a sound like silk sliding over steel. Smooth, deep, powerful, but refined. The starling trembled slightly, then settled into an idle so quiet Margaret could hardly believe it was running. Tom sat frozen, hands on the wheel, face illuminated by the dashboard lights that had flickered to life. "My God," he whispered. "It works! It actually works!" Margaret felt tears on her face again, but these were different, not grief for Eugene and Catherine, but something like joy. Something like vindication for every dreamer who'd ever been told their vision was impossible. Tom revved the engine gently. The Starling responded with that same silky power. No knocking, no hesitation. The sound was unlike any car Margaret had heard. More refined than modern engines, more purposeful. Like it had been designed by someone who understood that power and grace weren't opposites. "We need to drive it," Tom said suddenly. "Tom, it's not registered. There's no insurance. We don't even—" "I don't care." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Maggie, this car hasn't been driven in probably 60 years. Eugene drove it once, maybe twice, then locked it away. Catherine never even saw it finished. Don't you think it deserves to move? Don't you think they deserve that?" It was reckless. It was foolish. It was everything they'd spent their lives being too practical to do. "I'll drive our car," Margaret said. "You follow in the Starling. We take it home before someone sees." "Home?" Tom blinked. "Maggie, we can't put it in our garage. There's no room, and the neighbors. We'll make room. We'll cover it." "Tom, you don't leave something like this in a storage unit. Not anymore. Not when we know the story." He nodded slowly. Then he smiled that smile again, the one that reminded her why she'd said yes 67 years ago when he'd asked her to marry him with nothing but a machinist's apprentice salary and a handful of dreams. "Okay," he said, "let's take her home." The drive was 15 minutes of pure terror and pure magic. Margaret led in the Toyota, watching her rearview mirror constantly. Seeing the Starling's headlights, original sealed beams that cast a warm yellow glow, following at a careful distance. Tom drove like he was carrying something sacred, which he was. 15 miles per hour under the speed limit, signaling every turn, stopping fully at every stop sign. They passed 2 police cars. Margaret's heart nearly stopped both times, but the officers didn't even glance at the midnight blue prototype following a beat-up Toyota. Why would they? It looked like any other restored classic, maybe heading home from a car show. Their house appeared on Jefferson Street, a modest 2-bedroom ranch they'd bought in 1962 for $12,000. It was worth maybe $90,000 now, and they owed $43,000 on the reverse mortgage they'd taken 5 years ago. The front lawn needed mowing. The gutters needed cleaning. It looked exactly like what it was, the home of elderly people struggling to maintain what they'd built. Margaret pulled into the driveway, then got out to open the garage door manually. The automatic opener had broken 8 months ago, and they hadn't had the $400 to fix it. Inside, the single-car garage was crammed with 40 years of accumulation. Boxes of Christmas decorations, the kids' old bicycles, garden tools, Tom's workbench buried under paint cans and broken appliances he kept meaning to fix. "There's no room," Tom said, pulling up in the Starling, engine still running with that impossibly smooth idle. Margaret looked at the garage, then at the car, then at her husband. Something crystallized in her mind, a decision that felt both completely insane and absolutely necessary. Then, "We make room," she said. For the next hour, they worked like people half their age, hauling everything out of the garage. Boxes on the lawn, bikes leaning against the house, tools piled by the front door. The neighbors' lights came on. Old Mrs. Henderson from next door appeared on her porch, watching with unconcealed curiosity. Margaret waved to her, smiling like this was completely normal, like elderly couples cleared out their garages at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday all the time. Mrs. Henderson waved back, uncertainly, then went inside. Finally, the garage was empty except for Tom's workbench, which he'd refused to move. "I need somewhere to work on her," he'd said, and Margaret hadn't argued. Tom guided the Starling in slowly. It fit with maybe 6 inches of clearance on each side, the lines of the car somehow elegant even in the cramped space. When he shut off the engine, the silence felt profound. They stood in the driveway, breathing hard, surrounded by the contents of their garage, looking at the midnight blue car that now occupied the space where their practical sedan usually lived. "We're crazy," Margaret said. "Completely," Tom agreed. "The Toyota will have to stay in the driveway. It'll get rained on. It's survived worse. We just spent our last money on a car we can't legally drive." "Yes, we did." Margaret started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all. Their age, their situation, their utter and complete foolishness. Tom joined her, and then they were both laughing in their driveway at 9:30 at night, 73 and 71 years old, in love with a dead man's dream. "We should probably start bringing this stuff back in," Tom said finally, gesturing at the lawn. "Tomorrow," Margaret said. "Tonight, I just want to sit with it for a while. Is that stupid?" "No." Tom took her hand, the same hand he'd held on their first date, their wedding day, in 3 hospital delivery rooms, at too many funerals. "It's not stupid at all." They went into the garage, pulled up 2 folding lawn chairs they'd earned in the clearing process, and sat facing the Starling. Tom found an old work light and angled it so it illuminated the car without being harsh. In the gentle light, the prototype looked like something from a dream. The curves were hypnotic, the craftsmanship evident in every panel. Margaret thought about Eugene's hands shaping this metal, hour after hour, while Catherine fought cancer in their bedroom. She thought about the promises people make and which ones they keep. "What do we do now?" Tom asked quietly. It was becoming their question, but this time Margaret had an answer. "We find out who Eugene Castellano was," she said. "We learn everything we can about him and Catherine. We document the car properly. And then," she paused, the idea forming as she spoke, "then we tell their story. We make sure people know what they tried to do." "How?" "I don't know yet. But Tom, this is important. This car, it's not just a prototype that didn't make it. It's proof that the system can be wrong, that ordinary people with extraordinary vision can build things that shame the experts, that love matters more than profit." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sound like Catherine." Margaret picked up the letter she'd tucked in her purse, Catherine's final words to Eugene. She read it again, the beautiful, fierce belief in her dying husband's dream. "I hope so," she said. "I hope I have half her courage." They sat in silence, 2 elderly people in a garage that smelled of motor oil and possibility, keeping company with a ghost's promise. Outside, Jefferson Street was quiet, the ordinary neighborhood settling into ordinary sleep. But inside the garage, something extraordinary waited. And, for the first time in 5 years of slow financial decline, Margaret Holloway felt wealthy beyond measure. Morning brought reality in the form of a phone call at 7 a.m. Margaret woke to the ringtone, an old-fashioned bell sound Tom had programmed years ago, and felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. Early morning calls meant bills, meant collection agencies, meant bad news in various forms. She picked up without looking at the caller ID. "Hello? Mrs. Holloway, this is Janet from First National Bank. I'm calling about your mortgage payment." "It's coming," Margaret said, the lie automatic. "My husband's pension check is delayed, but it'll be there next week." A pause. "Mrs. Holloway, you're 74 days overdue." If we don't receive payment within the next 2 weeks, we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings." The words were gentle but implacable. Margaret had heard variations of them before. The carefully professional tone of people paid to deliver threats politely. "I understand," she said. "We'll have it to you." She hung up without waiting for a response, sat on the edge of the bed, feeling every one of her 71 years. Beside her, Tom stirred. Who was it? The bank. She didn't need to say more. Tom's face tightened, aging a decade in a moment. He sat up slowly, joints creaking audibly. 2 weeks, Margaret added. How much do we need? 4,700 for the 2 months we're behind, plus penalties. They both knew they didn't have it. Tom's pension was $1,500 a month. Margaret's Social Security was $800. After utilities, groceries, Tom's medications for his heart condition, her prescriptions for blood pressure and thyroid, there was nothing left. There hadn't been anything left for 5 years now. The Starling sat in their garage, worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions if it was truly unique. One phone call to an auction house would solve everything. Margaret looked at her husband, saw him looking at her. The same thought passing between them without words. "I'll make coffee," Tom said finally. They had breakfast in silence, toast and jam, orange juice watered down to make it last longer. Through the kitchen window, Margaret could see Mrs. Henderson standing on her lawn, staring at the pile of garage contents they'd left scattered across their front yard. "We need to clean that up," she said. "After coffee." But before coffee was finished, the doorbell rang. Margaret and Tom exchanged glances. More bad news? Mrs. Henderson coming to complain? They'd lived on Jefferson Street for 62 years without drama, and suddenly they were the neighborhood curiosity. Margaret answered the door to find a man in his 50s, well-dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, holding a folder. He had the look of someone comfortable with money. Good watch, expensive sunglasses hooked in his collar, the casual confidence of the never broke. "Mrs. Holloway?" he asked, smile bright and professional. "I'm David Chen. I was at the storage auction yesterday. I wonder if I could talk to you about Unit 247. Every instinct Margaret had developed over 7 decades screamed warning, but she kept her face neutral, polite. "What about it?" "I bid on that unit," Chen said. "I was prepared to go to 1,500, maybe 2,000, but you and your husband seemed very interested, so I backed off. Professional courtesy. I like to let regular people win sometimes, you know." The condescension in his voice was subtle but present. Regular people, like he was doing charity work. "That's very kind," Margaret said flatly. "Was there something specific you wanted?" "I did some research last night. Eugene Castellano, the original owner, turns out he was a fairly well-known figure in certain engineering circles. Brilliant but troubled, never got recognition he deserved, died alone about 5 years ago. The storage company held his unit as long as they legally could before auctioning." Chen's smile widened slightly. "I'm a collector, Mrs. Holloway. Automotive history is my passion, and I believe there was a vehicle in that unit, something potentially very rare and valuable. I wanted to make you an offer before you get in over your head." "An offer?" Margaret repeated. $10,000, cash for whatever was in that unit. I'll even help you load it, handle all the transportation. You walk away with a nice profit, I get an interesting piece for my collection. Everyone wins." Behind Margaret, Tom appeared in the doorway. He must have heard the conversation. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. 10,000. "Enough for the mortgage, with plenty left over." "That's generous," Tom said slowly. "But we haven't fully inventoried the unit yet. Don't know if there's anything that valuable." Chen's smile turned knowing. "Mr. Holloway, I've been collecting for 20 years. I know when someone's found something special. The way you and your wife were looking at that unit yesterday, that wasn't ordinary excitement. You found something." He paused. "I'm offering you a fair price for something you probably can't even get out of that storage unit without help. Think about it. No hassle, no risk, just cash in hand." Margaret felt Tom's hand on her shoulder, a question in the pressure of his fingers. They could end this now. 10,000 would save the house, buy them breathing room, let them return to their ordinary struggles without the complication of extraordinary dreams. She thought about Eugene in his garage, building the impossible while his wife died. She thought about Catherine's letter. "You're building proof that ordinary people can create extraordinary things if they're brave enough to try." "No," Margaret said. "I'm sorry?" "No, thank you, Mr. Chen. We're not interested in selling." "Mrs. Holloway, you don't understand what you have. Without proper documentation, insurance, the right connections, you can't do anything with it. I'm offering you a way out that puts money in your pocket." "We don't need a way out," Tom said, his hand still on Margaret's shoulder. "We need a way forward. That's different." Chen's professional smile faded slightly. "You're making a mistake. That car, and I know it's a car, I saw the tarp, needs expert handling. People like me, with resources and connections, not—" He stopped himself, but the unspoken words hung in the air. "Not old people with no money and no options." "Thank you for your interest," Margaret said firmly. "Have a good day, Mr. Chen." She closed the door before he could respond. Through the window, she watched him stand on the porch for a moment, jaw tight with frustration, before stalking back to his BMW parked at the curb. Tom let out a long breath. "We just turned down $10,000 we desperately need." "Yes. The bank is going to foreclose in 2 weeks." "Yes. Margaret." She turned to face him. "Tom, if we sell to him, that car disappears into some private collection. It becomes a curiosity for rich people to look at during cocktail parties. Eugene's story dies. Catherine's faith means nothing. Everything they sacrificed gets reduced to interesting automotive footnote. And if we lose the house?" The question hung between them, heavy with all its implications. This house, their home for 6 decades, the place they'd raised their children, built their life. The thought of losing it was physically painful. But Margaret thought about Catherine's letter again, about the choice between comfort and meaning, about what kind of person she wanted to be at 71, with maybe 10 or 15 years left, if she was lucky. "Then we lose the house," she said quietly. "But we don't lose ourselves." Tom stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, then we'd better figure out what we're going to do." What they did was spend the next 3 days learning everything they could about Eugene Castellano and the Starling. Tom started with the car itself, documenting every detail with Margaret's help. They photographed every angle, every component, every handwritten label Eugene had left. Tom measured, sketched, made notes in a composition book with the careful precision of his machinist days. Margaret dove into Eugene's papers. The storage unit's contents now filled half their living room. Boxes of documents, photographs, technical drawings, correspondence. She organized it all chronologically, building a timeline of Eugene and Catherine's life. What emerged was a story more complex and painful than they'd first understood. Eugene Castellano had been born in 1921, son of Italian immigrants, brilliant with machines from childhood. He'd served in World War II as a B-17 mechanic, come home with skills and dreams. He'd met Catherine in 1947 at a USO dance, married her 3 months later. The documents from those early years showed a happy couple navigating post-war America. Eugene working as an engineer at a small Detroit firm, Catherine as a secretary, both saving money, planning for children that never came. Margaret found medical records from 1950 indicating Catherine couldn't conceive. In the margins of one letter, Catherine had written, "If we can't create life, perhaps we can create something else that matters." The car became that something else. Eugene's initial designs dated to 1951, just sketches, dreams on paper. But by 1952, he'd secured backing from a local businessman impressed by his vision. Margaret found the contract, $15,000 in exchange for 20% of any future profits. Then the rejection letters started. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, even smaller companies like Studebaker and Nash. Everyone Eugene approached said the same things. Too revolutionary, not commercially viable, interesting but impractical. Tom found something Margaret had missed, a letter from a Ford executive, dated April 1953. "Mr. Castellano, your design is impressive, and I don't doubt you could build what you've drawn. But you fundamentally misunderstand the automobile industry. We don't make cars to advance technology. We make cars to generate reliable profits. Your design would require retooling our entire manufacturing process, retraining our workforce, and convincing dealers to sell something their customers don't understand yet. Even if it performed exactly as you claim, it would take 15 years to recoup our investment. We can make more money selling our current models with minor year-to-year changes. Innovation is expensive. Iteration is profitable. I admire your vision, but I have shareholders to answer to. They want dividends, not dreams." "That bastard," Tom muttered when Margaret showed him the letter. "That smug, short-sighted bastard." But Margaret saw something else in the letter, the honesty of it. The executive wasn't wrong about the system he worked in. He was just trapped in it, like everyone else, doing what made sense within the narrow boundaries of quarterly profits and shareholder expectations. Eugene had tried anyway. The documents showed him burning through his savings, maxing out credit, mortgaging the house. Catherine's illness began in early 1954. The medical bills added financial catastrophe to an already desperate situation. Yet Eugene had kept building. Margaret found his bank statements, watched the account dwindle to double digits, while he ordered specialty parts, rented machine time, paid for metallurgical testing. Every dollar Catherine's earned as a secretary went into the car. They ate cheap food, wore old clothes, stopped seeing friends because they couldn't afford to socialize. The final photograph Margaret found broke her heart. It was dated September 1954, 2 months after Catherine's death. Eugene stood next to the completed Starling in what looked like a warehouse or large garage. He wasn't smiling. The car gleamed in a harsh light, beautiful and perfect, and the man who'd built it looked 20 years older than his 33 years. On the back of the photo, in that neat handwriting, "First and last photograph." Nobody came to see it. Nobody cared. Catherine was right. I built proof. But proof without witness is just one man's delusion. "God," Margaret whispered, showing the photo to Tom. He thought he'd failed. Tom studied the image, his machinist's eye noting details. But he didn't fail. "Look at that car, Maggie. It's perfect." He did exactly what he said he'd do. But nobody knew. Nobody cared. He died thinking it was all for nothing. The documents from Eugene's later years were sparse. He'd lived quietly, worked various engineering jobs, never married again. His obituary, clipped from a local paper, was 3 sentences. Eugene Castellano, 89, died March 15, 2020. Former automotive engineer, no survivors. 3 sentences for a man who tried to change the world. Margaret sat in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of Eugene's life, and felt a fury she hadn't known she could still feel. Not at Eugene, or even at the companies that rejected him. At the system itself. The way it crushed dreamers, rewarded caution, chose profits over possibility. "We have to do something," she said to Tom on the third night, both of them exhausted from research, from documenting, from trying to understand what they'd inherited along with the car. "Like what?" Tom asked. He was at his laptop, ancient and slow but functional, trying to find automotive historians who might care about Eugene's work. So far, he'd sent 14 emails and gotten 2 responses, both polite versions of "interesting, but not really my focus." Margaret didn't have an answer. Just a bone-deep certainty that Eugene's story couldn't end in their living room, forgotten and unfinished. Then her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Margaret almost didn't answer. They'd learned to screen calls, avoiding the parade of collection agencies and robo-dialers. But something made her pick up. "Hello? Mrs. Holloway. My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a journalist with the Detroit Free Press. I'm calling about Eugene Castellano and the Starling prototype." Margaret's heart stuttered. She looked at Tom, who'd frozen at his laptop. "How did you—" "David Chen posted about it on a classic car forum," Torres said. "He was complaining about elderly people who didn't know what they had. Said he'd offered $10,000 for a priceless prototype and got turned down. The story caught my attention." She paused. "Is it true? Did Eugene actually build a fully functional prototype in his garage?" Margaret's mind raced. A journalist, the Detroit Free Press. This could be everything, a way to tell Eugene's story, to give his work the witness it deserved. Or it could be a disaster that brought unwanted attention, legal complications, threats to the only valuable thing they owned. "Mrs. Holloway?" Torres prompted. Tom was watching her, silent question in his eyes. Trust or protect? Risk or caution? Margaret thought about Catherine's letter one more time, about the choice between fear and courage, about the fact that she and Tom were 71 and 73, with maybe a decade left, maybe less. "Yes," she said, "Eugene built something extraordinary, and someone should know about it." "Can I come see it?" Torres asked. "Tomorrow, if possible. I'll bring a photographer. If this is what I think it is, Mrs. Holloway, this could be a major story. Eugene Castellano's story deserves to be told." "Tomorrow," Margaret agreed, praying she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life. 10 a.m. "Do you have our address?" She gave it, hung up, and looked at Tom. "We just invited the world in," he said quietly. "Yes. The bank, the collectors, everyone. They'll all know now." "Yes. We could lose everything." Margaret picked up the photograph of Eugene with his completed car, the man who'd kept his promise, even when it left him with nothing. "Or," she said, "we could finally help someone's dream matter." Rebecca Torres arrived at exactly 10 a.m., driving a modest Honda, accompanied by a photographer named James who looked to be in his 30s, hauling professional camera equipment. Margaret and Tom had spent the morning cleaning the garage, clearing space around the Starling, setting up proper lighting. They'd moved the car slightly forward so its full profile would be visible. In the morning sun filtering through the garage door, the midnight blue paint seemed to glow. Torres was younger than Margaret expected, maybe 40, dressed professionally but not formally, with an intensity in her eyes that reminded Margaret of Eugene's photographs, the look of someone who cared deeply about something beyond themselves. "Oh my God," Torres breathed when she saw the car. She stopped just inside the garage, staring. James raised his camera, started shooting immediately, the rapid click of the shutter the only sound for a long moment. "Is it real?" Torres finally asked, moving closer. "I mean, is this actually a functional prototype, or is it just—" "It runs," Tom said quietly. "Original engine, hand-built. We started it 4 days ago. Everything works." Torres looked at him sharply. "You're certain? This isn't a replica or a kit car or—" "I'm certain." Tom gestured to his workbench, where he'd laid out Eugene's documentation: the manual, the maintenance logs, the engineering drawings. Eugene Castellano built this between 1952 and 1954. Every part hand-fabricated or specially ordered. It represents technology that wouldn't be commercially available for 20 to 30 years. Torres moved to the workbench, started reading. Margaret watched her face change, professional interest deepening into something like wonder. "This is incredible," Torres murmured, flipping through the drawings. My God, this is a complete documentation of independent automotive development. Do you know how rare this is?" "We're learning," Margaret said. For the next 2 hours, Torres interviewed them while James photographed everything: the car from every angle, the documentation, Eugene's tools, even the storage unit receipt and auction catalog. Torres asked detailed questions, took extensive notes, listened with complete attention. Margaret told Catherine's story, reading passages from the letters. Tom explained the engineering innovations, showing how Eugene had solved problems the major manufacturers wouldn't tackle for decades. Together, they reconstructed Eugene and Catherine's struggle, their refusal to quit, the price they'd paid for vision. "Why didn't he keep trying?" Torres asked. "After Catherine died, after he finished the car, why did he give up?" Margaret showed her the final photograph, Eugene's annotation on the back. Torres read it, face somber. "He didn't give up," Torres said. "He just ran out of strength. There's a difference." She looked at Margaret and Tom. "Why are you doing this? You could sell this car for a fortune. I've done enough automotive journalism to know collectors would pay mid-six figures, maybe more, for a verified one-of-a-kind prototype. You're clearly not wealthy." Her eyes took in their modest home, the worn furniture visible through the door, the little details that spoke of people living carefully. "Why not take the money?" It was Tom who answered. "Because we're the only witness he ever got," he said. "Eugene built something impossible, and nobody saw it. Nobody cared. He died thinking it was all wasted effort. We can't give him his life back or Catherine's, but we can make sure people know what they did. That's worth more than money." Torres studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'm going to write this story," she said. "Front page, if my editor agrees. I'm going to tell Eugene and Catherine's story, and I'm going to make people understand what was lost when the industry ignored him." She paused. "But you need to know, once this goes public, everything changes. You'll get attention, collectors, museums, maybe the IRS wondering about taxes on a valuable asset. Your life won't be quiet anymore." "It's not quiet now," Margaret said. "The bank is foreclosing on our house in 10 days. We spent our last money buying that storage unit."
"We're 71 and 73 years old, and we've been poor for 5 years. She gestured at the Starling. "This car is the first thing in a long time that's made us feel like something besides failure. Whatever happens, it's worth it." Torres's expression softened. "I'm going to help you," she said. "Not just with the story. I know people. Automotive historians, museum curators, legal advocates. There are ways to protect this car, to honor Eugene's work, that don't involve selling it to some private collector who'll lock it away." "Why would you help us?" Tom asked. "Because stories like this are why I became a journalist," Torres said simply. "Because Eugene Castellano deserved better, and so do you. Because," she touched the Starling's fender gently, "because this is proof that the system can be wrong, that ordinary people with extraordinary vision can shame the experts, and right now we need that proof more than ever." The article ran 3 days later on the front page of the Detroit Free Press. "The Starling: How One Man's Impossible Dream Sat Forgotten for 60 Years." Rebecca Torres had written it beautifully. She'd woven Eugene and Catherine's love story with the technical details, contrasted Eugene's innovations with Detroit's rejection, and centered Margaret and Tom as the inheritors of an unfinished legacy. The photographs James took were stunning, the Starling gleaming in their garage, Eugene's drawings spread on the workbench, Margaret holding Catherine's final letter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By noon, Margaret and Tom's phone was ringing constantly. News stations wanting interviews, automotive magazines requesting access, museums inquiring about acquisition, and collectors, dozens of collectors, each claiming to be different from David Chen, each insisting they'd honor Eugene's work properly, each offering money that climbed from $50,000 to $200,000 to $500,000 in the span of 6 hours. Tom stopped answering the phone. Margaret let it ring, feeling paralyzed by the weight of decisions she didn't know how to make. Then, at 3 p.m., a different kind of call came through. Margaret answered without thinking, overwhelmed and exhausted. "Mrs. Holloway? This is Marcus Washington. I'm the director of the Henry Ford Museum." Margaret's breath caught. The Henry Ford Museum, one of the most prestigious automotive collections in the world, right there in Detroit. "I read Rebecca Torres' article," Washington continued. "Mrs. Holloway, what Eugene Castellano built is exactly the kind of story we're trying to preserve, not just successful innovations, but the ones that didn't make it, the dreamers who got crushed by the system. Would you and your husband be willing to meet with me? I'd like to discuss a partnership." "Partnership?" Margaret's voice came out shaky. "The museum acquiring the Starling on long-term loan, with you and Tom as consultants and storytellers. We'd preserve the car, display it with full documentation of Eugene and Catherine's story, and you'd retain ownership while ensuring it's protected and accessible to the public." He paused. "We'd also pay a consulting fee. Nothing like what private collectors are offering, I'm sure, but enough to, well, Rebecca mentioned you were facing foreclosure. We might be able to help with that." Margaret felt tears on her face. She gestured frantically at Tom, who came quickly, and she put the phone on speaker. "How much?" Tom asked bluntly. $20,000 initially for conservation and documentation work. Then $2,000 a month for 5 years as consulting fees while we develop the exhibition. And after that? "Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Holloway, if this car generates the interest I think it will, we'd want to commission a book, a documentary, educational materials. Eugene's story deserves comprehensive telling." Margaret and Tom looked at each other. 20,000, enough for the mortgage. 2,000 a month, enough to stop the slow slide into poverty, to afford medications, to breathe. "Why?" Margaret asked. "Private collectors are offering more." "Because those collectors will put the Starling in a climate-controlled garage and show it to their friends at parties," Washington said. "We'll put it in a museum where 100,000 people a year will see it. We'll make sure Eugene Castellano's name means something, that Catherine's faith wasn't wasted, that their story inspires other dreamers." He paused. "Isn't that worth more than money?" Tom's hand found Margaret's, squeezed gently. "Yes," Margaret said. "Yes, it is." The next 2 weeks moved with dreamlike speed. Marcus Washington arrived with a team of conservators who examined the Starling with reverent care, documenting every detail, taking hundreds of measurements and photographs. They brought specialists in 1950s automotive design, metallurgy experts, engineering historians. Each one looked at Eugene's work with growing amazement. "This is extraordinary," one conservator kept repeating. "The precision, the innovation. This would be impressive work today. In 1954, built in a garage with hand tools? It's almost miraculous." Rebecca Torres' article had sparked a media firestorm. National news picked it up. Car magazines ran features. Online, the story went viral. The elderly couple, the dead dreamer, the lost prototype. Margaret and Tom found themselves at the center of something much larger than they'd imagined. More importantly, people started researching Eugene Castellanos.
Automotive historians dug through archives, finding references to his rejected proposals, his correspondence with manufacturers, his quiet brilliance. A Detroit Historical Society researcher discovered that Eugene had held 17 patents for various mechanical innovations, most of which had been bought by companies that never credited him. The man who died in obscurity was becoming known. Margaret spent hours with the museum's archivists, going through every document from the storage unit, helping them build a comprehensive record. She shared Catherine's letters, Eugene's journals, the photographs and drawings and receipts that told their story. Tom worked with the conservation team, explaining the car's mechanics, helping them understand Eugene's innovations. Watching him show the hand-fabricated components, seeing the respect in the younger engineer's eyes as Tom explained the solutions Eugene had pioneered, Margaret saw her husband come alive in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. The bank called again, but this time Margaret had answers. "The payment will be there Friday," she said calmly. "All of it, plus penalties." The silence on the other end was gratifying. They paid the mortgage, paid off their credit cards, bought Tom's medications without checking prices first, bought real groceries instead of the discount brands, replaced the broken garage door opener. Small things, ordinary things, but each one felt like a weight lifting. The Henry Ford Museum's check cleared. The contract was signed. The Starling would be displayed prominently, with full documentation of Eugene and Catherine's story, and Margaret and Tom named as consultants and storytellers. They'd visit regularly, talk to visitors, keep Eugene's memory alive. David Chen called once, anger barely concealed beneath professional courtesy. "You made a mistake," he said. "That car should be in a private collection where it can be properly valued." "It's going to be valued by thousands of people," Margaret replied. "That seems proper enough." He hung up without responding. The exhibition opened 3 months later, on a cold January morning. The Henry Ford Museum had built an entire gallery around the Starling, titled Dreams and Rejection, the Eugene Castellano Story. The car sat on a rotating platform, lit dramatically, looking like something from an alternate history where visionaries won and systems adapted to brilliance instead of crushing it. But the car was only part of it. The walls held blown-up photographs of Eugene and Catherine, excerpts from their letters, technical drawings, the rejection letters from Detroit's automakers. Interactive displays let visitors explore Eugene's innovations, showing how each one eventually became standard technology, just decades too late for the man who'd first imagined them. One wall was devoted to Catherine's final letter, reproduced in elegant script, her words about love and belief and the courage to build impossible things. Margaret and Tom stood at the entrance as the museum opened, watching the first visitors enter. A school group, teenagers who'd probably never heard of Eugene Castellano yesterday. They gathered around the car, phones out, taking pictures, reading the plaques. "This is insane," one kid said. "He built this in his garage?" "With his dying wife supporting him the whole time," another read from the display. "Damn, that's dedication." An elderly man stopped in front of Catherine's letter, reading slowly. Margaret saw his eyes redden, saw him touch the glass gently before moving on. A middle-aged woman studied the rejection letters, anger visible in her face. "The bastards," Margaret heard her mutter. "They rejected this because it was too good." Tom slipped his hand into Margaret's. They'd done this. They'd taken a forgotten storage unit and turned it into something that mattered, something that would outlive them, something that proved Eugene's faith wasn't wasted. Rebecca Torres found them near closing time. She'd been at the opening, taking notes for a follow-up article. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "Eugene would be proud." "I hope so," Margaret said. "I hope somehow he knows. He knows." Torres gestured at the gallery, where even at closing time, people still lingered, unwilling to leave. "This many witnesses? He knows." That night, Margaret and Tom drove home in comfortable silence. The Toyota ran smoothly. They'd finally had the transmission fixed, along with a dozen other deferred maintenance items. The house on Jefferson Street looked warm and welcoming. Lights on, gutters cleaned, lawn properly mowed. They were safe. The mortgage was paid. Tom's medications were current. They could breathe. But more than that, they'd done something. Something that mattered. Tom pulled into the driveway, now occupied by their Toyota instead of a priceless prototype. The garage was empty, except for his workbench and some storage boxes. The Starling lived at the museum now, where it belonged, where Eugene's dream could finally be witnessed. Inside, Margaret made tea. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one they'd had for 40 years, in the home they'd almost lost, surrounded by 67 years of shared life. "We did good," Tom said quietly. "We did what Catherine asked," Margaret replied. "We believed in something. We chose meaning over safety. We got lucky. If Torres hadn't called..." If. Margaret reached across the table, took his hand. "We got lucky because we were brave enough to let ourselves be lucky. We could have sold to Chen. We could have hidden from attention. We chose otherwise." Tom smiled, the real smile, the one she'd fallen in love with. "When did you get so philosophical?" "About 3 months ago, when I realized we might lose everything anyway, so we might as well lose it doing something that mattered." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking tea, holding hands across the table. Outside, Jefferson Street was quiet, the ordinary neighborhood they'd lived in for 62 years, unchanged by their small, extraordinary act. But they were changed. Margaret felt it in her bones, the difference between existing and living. For 5 years, they'd been shrinking, growing smaller as the world grew harder. The Starling had reminded them they could still expand, still risk, still believe in things larger than survival. "What do we do now?" Tom asked. Their question, the one they'd been asking for years. But this time, Margaret had an answer that felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. "We keep telling stories," she said. "The museum wants us to consult on other lost innovators. Torres mentioned a book project. And Tom," she squeezed his hand, "we have maybe 10 or 15 more years if we're lucky. Let's spend them being brave." Tom nodded slowly. "Being brave," he repeated. "I like that." "Besides," Margaret added with a slight smile, "we're already broke and old and running out of time. What else could go wrong?" Tom laughed, full and genuine, the sound filling their small kitchen. "You've become a philosopher and an optimist. What's next?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted, "but I'm not afraid to find out anymore." They finished their tea, did the dishes together like they'd done thousands of times before, got ready for bed with the comfortable choreography of 67 years of marriage. But something was different now, not in what they did, but in who they were while doing it. Before turning off the light, Margaret picked up the photograph she'd kept. Eugene and Catherine at the USO dance, young and laughing, decades before disappointment and disease, before dreams and death. She'd framed it, placed it on the nightstand. "Good night, Eugene," she whispered. "Good night, Catherine. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like." Tom kissed her forehead, a gesture older than memory. "Think they're watching?" "I think they're finally resting," Margaret said, knowing their story mattered after all. She turned off the light. In the darkness, she thought about the Starling rotating slowly under museum lights, gleaming midnight blue, beautiful and impossible, proof that ordinary people could build extraordinary things if they were brave enough to try. Outside, Jefferson Street slept. Inside, 2 elderly people drifted toward dreams, no longer afraid of the morning, no longer shrinking from the future. They'd found something in a storage unit, not just a car, but a reminder of what it meant to believe, to risk, to choose meaning over safety, courage over caution, possibility over fear. And in finding it, they'd found themselves again. The starling lived on, Catherine's faith vindicated, Eugene's promise kept. And Margaret and Tom Holloway, 71 and 73 years old, learned that it's never too late to be brave, never too late to matter, never too late to witness and be witnessed. Some stories end in loss, some in triumph. This one ended in both and neither. It ended in a small house on Jefferson Street, with two people holding hands in the dark, wealthy beyond measure in ways that had nothing to do with money. It ended with the understanding that what we choose to value, what we choose to preserve, what we choose to believe in, these choices define us more than our circumstances ever could. The starling was one man's impossible dream, one woman's unwavering faith, and two elderly people's refusal to let dreams die forgotten. And that, Margaret thought, as sleep claimed her, was more than enough. It was everything.